All right, so remember the situation. Right, Joseph had received the special robe. It exalted him over his brothers. Joseph was, without a doubt, Jacob's favorite. Everybody knew it. The brothers knew it. The robe was a constant reminder of Jacob's favoritism. Joseph had dreams, and in these dreams, his brothers would bow down to him. And Joseph, with the lack of wisdom or discernment at the time, decided to share this with his brothers. And they hated him even more. They could not even speak civilly to him. So this is the situation, right? This is the family dynamic. They hate him. It is very clear. Now, as we continue this passage, God's name is not mentioned at all. And we've seen this a number of times, but God is not mentioned at all in this passage. When we read the Bible and God is not mentioned, we have to ask a few questions. Why is God not mentioned? Where is he? Is he still working? And if so, how is he working? See, it's important to ask because when you ask these questions, you can start to see how God works in our lives. You can start to see how God works behind the scenes, where things that we can't see, that we don't understand. One of the things I enjoy, because I'm a history nerd, is you read the history of Israel. Right? You read about Assyria and Babylon and Persia. And then you go and you read the histories of them. Not from the Bible, but from the history, their version of books. And you see how things played out. What the Bible tells us God did, you see it how it played out in history. And this is similar. It's kind of the same thing where you see God working in Joseph's life. Make no mistake, right? God is not mentioned in this passage, but he is here. It is very clear God is working. When God doesn't seem to be doing anything, he is. And when you realize that, you learn to trust he is accomplishing his purposes. See, one of the biggest struggles that we have as human beings is we think we are the centers of the universe. Right? People used to think the earth was the center of the universe, but in reality, we think that we are the centers of the universe. That everything revolves around us. Why me? Why is this happening to me? If God was good, why is this happening? As if everything that happens is about us. But in passages like this, we begin to understand that even in the darkest times, right, when things seem to be helpless, God is accomplishing his purpose. And we understand that we are not the center of the universe. God is. And all things work together for good for those who love God and are called according to his purpose. We are here for his purpose, his glory, and understanding this is essential to living out our faith. When God's name is not mentioned in the passage, we see how his sovereignty works in conjunction with free will. Right? There's always this debate of free will and God's sovereignty, and it's really not a debate. Somebody once asked Charles Spurgeon, how do you reconcile those two things, free will and God's sovereignty? And Spurgeon said, you don't have to reconcile friends. We don't understand it, and that's okay. But make no mistake, again, Joseph's brothers here act freely. They do what they want. But God orchestrated this for his plan and his purpose. So, Joseph's brothers are out pasturing the flock. They're supposed to be in Shechem. Remember Shechem, that's where Levi and Simeon killed all the guys. That's where Jacob had once lived. This is now 50 miles from where Jacob and Joseph were. So, where they were in Hebron to Shechem was 50 miles. It's about a 3 to 4 day journey by foot. So Jacob sends Joseph to his brothers to bring back a report. Now remember, last time we saw Joseph went out to his brothers. he brought a bad report back. So one, Jacob knew that Joseph was going to be truthful, but also his brothers knew that Joseph was going to be truthful. And that's not always a good combination. And so Jacob, apparently completely unaware of his brothers or his son's hatred of their brother, he was completely unaware of their total and utter depravity. But Jacob trusted Joseph. And sadly, this is the last conversation they would have for a long, long time. Joseph agreed without hesitation. Again, showing his obedience. He was the obedient son in spite of his brother's hatred toward him, and he went willingly. So Joseph went to Shechem, but his brothers weren't there. He roamed around. Imagine, this is Joseph. He's walking around from field to field, just wandering around, trying to figure out what's going on, trying to find out where they were. This shows his faithfulness. Joseph easily could have gone to Shechem. They're not there. Turn around and go home and say, they're not there. I don't know where they are. But that's not Joseph. He may be naive. He may not have full maturity yet, but he was faithful. And so a man who's not named came out to Joseph and said, all right, you're wandering around. What are you doing? What are you looking for? And so he told them, I'm looking for my brothers. They were 15 miles north of Shechem, another day's journey in Dothan. This man is not identified, but again, he was put there by God. Joseph needed to find his brothers so that he could get to Egypt. He's not aware of this. Nobody's aware of this yet. Dothan was at a crossroads, a major crossroads of the trading route. It went from, major road went east to west and north to south, and it went through Dothan. So they would go from up north, they would go down to Dothan, they would head west, and then head down to Egypt. So this is a major intersection. The brothers were tending the flocks near Dothan. So there's 10 of them there, and they look up, and what do they see? They see the robe. They see the robe, their favorite reminder that Joseph was the favorite. They immediately recognize him, and their response tells of their utter hatred for their brother. Complete hatred. Verse 19 and 20. They said to one another, here comes this dreamer. Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits. Then we'll say a fierce animal has devoured him, and we will see what becomes of his dreams. They have not forgotten about the dreams. In fact, they use the dreams as a term of derision. They call him the dreamer. Here's this brother that we hate, this dreamer. He's got big dreams, and it's all bad for us. And so they plotted to kill Joseph, and his dreams would not be fulfilled. Isn't that the human way? Let's try to stop God from fulfilling his promise. It's not going to happen. But the dreams at this point, so many of us know the end of the story, so we know where this goes. But imagine seeing this for the first time and seeing it in Joseph's eyes. His dreams are now in jeopardy. His dreams are now in question. Would God's dream, the dreams that God gave him, be fulfilled? They were going to kill him and blame it on a wild animal. This is a perfect opportunity, right? There's no CSI. There's no fingerprints. There's nothing. They are in a wilderness, and it was not uncommon for people to be attacked by wild animals. It's a dangerous place. So they have the perfect opportunity, and they can get away with it. They can get rid of him, and he would never be seen or heard from again. And the brothers fed off of each other. Right? They kind of have a mob mentality. The way this is written in Hebrew indicates that it is a mob mentality. It's not something that any one of them would have done individually, but they do collectively. 1 Corinthians 15:33 warns us, do not be deceived. Bad company corrupts good morals. Your friends influence you. Those around you will influence you. And this is what's going on with Joseph's brothers. See, there are dangers of being around the wrong groups of people. The influence is real. So they come up with this idea, and then Reuben has a better idea. Instead of killing Joseph directly, let's put him in a pit. There's a picture of the pit that we see. So the one on the left is obviously the picture taken from the top. And that's what the pits look like. Those are in Dothan, so it could have very well been one of these pits that Joseph was in. But they're pits that were dug. Normally they either contained water or some sort of grain so that they could feed or water the flocks. But the one that Joseph was in was empty. So he's not getting out of that by himself. Right? It's not like he was put in and then he could climb out. Jeremiah learned all about these pits when he was put in one later on. Right? Again, it's not uncommon for people to be put in pits or dead bodies to be put in pits. This happened. And so Reuben's idea, let's put them in a pit. See, no blood would be directly on their hands. He would die of thirst and exposure, but they wouldn't be directly guilty of killing Joseph. And it's possible that Reuben acted out of compassion. It's possible that Reuben thought, you know what, he is our brother, let's save him. I mean, those were his words. Let's not kill him. Those are his words. He would return and he would rescue Joseph out of the pit. He would then be the hero. He would bring Joseph back to Jacob, and Reuben would be put in the right place again. Remember, Reuben and his little antics with Bilhah kind of took Reuben out of Jacob's favor. This would bring him back. So that was his idea. The brothers stripped Joseph of the robe, a symbol of Jacob's favoritism. There's no way he's keeping this robe. There's no way he's keeping this robe. And so he's put in the cistern, and while Joseph was in the pit, he begged for his life. Genesis 42, the brothers say that Joseph was in distress of his soul and begged them, but they did not listen. Now, again, imagine the scenario. Joseph's in that pit. He's there. He's begging them. He's pleading them. He is in absolute distress. Please let me out of here. So what do his brothers do? They sit down to eat. They sit down to eat. Now, if you have ever watched any of the crime shows that are out there, which apparently that's all they make anymore, but there's the crime shows, and what is one of the ways that they try to make the person look exceedingly evil? Just going on with life as the person next to them is suffering. As they are killing this person, they're over here eating lunch. We just put our brother in a pit. We just stripped his robe off of him. We just put him in a pit. You know, I'm kind of hungry. Let's have a sandwich. Like, this shows their exceedingly evil mindset. Their brother is begging for his life, and they sit down to eat lunch. Then the brothers look up. Right? They take a bite of the sandwich and look up, and there's a caravan coming their way. Again, they're at a major crossroads. And they see a tribe of Ishmaelites. And Judah saw the opportunity to capitalize. Judah saw the opportunity. He becomes a leader of sorts, and not in a good way. Rather than kill Joseph, they could sell him. Hey, why would we kill him? We can make some money. We can get something out of this. So instead of killing him, let's sell him as a slave. Let's sell him to this caravan. And either way, he's gone for good. Either way, we never have to worry about seeing Joseph again and his silly little dreams. He'll go somewhere far away, and we'll never hear from him again. There's no cell phones. There's no email. There's no mail. There's nothing. He can't communicate. He's gone forever. And so they bring Joseph out of the pit, and they sell him to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver, which is a typical price for a slave. Now, the Bible doesn't tell us what's going on in Joseph's mind. I don't know if he knew when he was being lifted out of the pit, if he thought for a moment that his brothers were being compassionate. But soon enough, he finds out that he's being sold as a slave. Now, we see in this passage that the term Midianite and Ishmaelite are kind of used interchangeably. They really become the same people group. They're often together. Their names are interchangeable. The Midianites later are absorbed into the Ishmaelites. Both tribes are from Abraham. Ishmael, the son of Abraham and Hagar, and Midian, the son of Abraham and Keturah. Keturah is the wife of Abraham after Sarah died. So this is all family. They would have met at a family reunion. They would have all been together. They're all from Abraham. Think about this. You have the seed, the promised seed, Jacob, and you have the rejected seed, the seed of Cain, the seed of the serpent. And the seed of the serpent seems to be winning. The Ishmaelites are doing well. The Midianites are doing well. And then you have the tribe of Jacob who are just kind of trudging along, and things are not going well. So Reuben, at some point, he had stepped away. He comes back, he looks in the pit, and Joseph is gone. What's going on? Notice what he said in verse 30. The boy is gone, and where shall I go? He didn't say, what'd you do with them? Where's Joseph? I can try to rescue him. Give me back those 20 pieces of silver, and I'll go get Joseph. No, he says, what am I going to do? Brothers, this was my chance to be in Dad's good graces. I was going to capitalize on this. What am I going to do? His concern was not for Joseph, but for himself. His opportunity was gone. Joseph was gone, and the brothers needed to cover their tracks. So they kill a goat. Right? Joseph can't just be gone. He can't just be missing. We have to find some evidence to bring back to Dad. And so they kill a goat, and they dip the robe in the blood of the goat. So that way it's covered with blood. There's no genetic testing. There's no lab that can say this is not human blood, this is goat blood. Just a bloody robe. The very thing that was given to Joseph as a symbol of his love, as Jacob's love, was now used as evidence of his destruction. Remember, they had a 4 to 5 day journey home, if not more, because they had flocks with them. So they had plenty of time to get their story straight. I imagine they're walking back and they're talking together. We need to figure this out. We need to make sure we all say the same thing. So they sent the robe ahead to Jacob. It's probably through a servant or one of the younger brothers, but they send the robe to Jacob ahead of time. We have found this robe. Please identify whether it is your son's robe or not. Notice they didn't even use Joseph's name. Jacob, Dad, will you identify, is this Joseph's robe? No, it's tell us if this is your son's robe or not. They wouldn't even use his name. Their callousness continued, and they continued to distance themselves from Joseph. And don't let the irony be lost. Jacob deceived his father Isaac with the skin of a goat and Esau's clothes, and his brothers, Joseph's brothers, deceived Jacob with the blood of a goat and Joseph's clothes. It goes full circle. They've learned on some level from their father. The sins of Jacob are now back on him. So Jacob mourned for Joseph, and his sons tried to comfort him. His sons tried to comfort him. They're the ones who did it. They sold Joseph. They knew where he was. They made Jacob believe that he was dead, that he was devoured by a wild animal. They knew he was alive. They were allowing Jacob to believe this and to mourn his death. and they tried to comfort him. See the absolute depravity in this family. They were the reason Jacob was mourning, and they were trying to comfort him. They deceived him, and now they were trying to bring comfort. See, this is the way of the enemy. This is what we do in life. We sin, and then we sin to cover up our sin. And then we sin to cover up that sin. It's a never-ending path that we are on. See, the deceitfulness of sin hardens our hearts. When we willingly sin, it hardens our hearts. And then it's easier to sin the next time and the next time. This is why Paul talks about beating his body into submission. It's hard work because it's easy to give in to temptation. But when you do, it's easier the next time. And it goes down a road that Joseph's brothers are on very clearly. Jacob refused to be comforted. He would die in sorrow from Joseph's death. He used the word Sheol. Sheol has different meanings depending on the context. Here it's simply Jacob saying, Joseph is in the grave and I'm going to the grave in sorrow. So Joseph was taken to Egypt. The Midianites sold him to Potiphar, the captain of the guard. Potiphar was in the military. He had a higher rank. His name means the gift of Ra. Ra, the Egyptian god. Joseph is now away from the family of God. He is in slavery in a land of many foreign false gods. It's fairly common for Canaanites to be servants or slaves in Egypt. So it's not an uncommon joke. Joseph wouldn't have been the only Canaanite in Egypt. It was a fairly common thing that Egypt had money and Canaan didn't. And so people would be obviously kidnapped and sold as slaves, or they would sell themselves as slaves. Now, let's remember back to Abraham, Isaac, and most recently Jacob. Abraham rescued Lot. He was rescued from Pharaoh and Abimelech. Isaac was protected from Abimelech. Jacob was protected from Laban and Esau. God protected these patriarchs from the harm that would come upon them. Abraham was the first called by God. He needed to experience how God could intercede. Isaac was similar, but he learned that God would provide. Jacob fled home and returned and was protected. He needed to learn that God was everywhere and that he needed to return to Canaan. Joseph's story is different. Joseph needed to go to Egypt, where he would be used to save his family and the world from a famine. He just didn't know it yet. See, the brothers thought that they could thwart God's plan, that Joseph's dream would be unfulfilled. They and Joseph needed to learn that it was impossible to stop God. Psalm 2, verses 1 through 6 says, "Why do the nations rage and the peoples plot in vain? The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, 'Let us burst their bonds apart and cast away their cords from us.' He who sits in the heavens laughs. The Lord holds them in derision. Then he will speak to them in his wrath and terrify them in his fury, saying, 'As for me, I have set my king on Zion, my holy hill.'" The world tries to stop God. And they make it their end goal to stop God, and God just laughs. You silly, silly people. Do you really think that you can stop the Almighty? Do you really think that you can stop God from fulfilling his purpose? I mean, the irony in this all is that his brothers, Joseph's brothers, were trying to stop the promise the dreams from being fulfilled. They thought that they could get rid of Joseph and that this dreamer's dreams would come to nothing. But God used their very actions. They were God's instruments in putting Joseph in a place in which he would rise in power and they would come and bow before him. Oh, the irony of our God. This is what it means that he laughs. The very things that you're doing are the things that I'm going to use to fulfill my promise. See, so often when God works, on our end of things, it looks like God contradicts himself. Or that he makes it so his goal, his claimed goal, his stated goal won't happen, as it looked here. But see, God doesn't live in the moments. God plays the long game. He's there for the long haul. He's not bound by space and time. He's not bound by any. He can use whatever, whenever he wants to fulfill his purpose. Remember, God is sovereign over all, and he works in ways that we cannot understand. My ways are higher than your ways, as high as the heavens are above the earth. Billions of light years away. That's how much higher his ways are than ours. He will always accomplish his purposes, but usually not in ways that we can understand. He will always accomplish his goal, but in the moments that we're in there, we wonder where God is. In those moments when things seem to be bleak, those who oppose God claim victory, but they don't know that God is still working. Joseph's brothers thought that they had won, but they didn't. It's the beauty of how God works. See, Scripture is full of those who claim victory only to later find out that they were deadly wrong. The best example, as we've already talked about, is the religious leaders who crucified our Lord. The religious leaders crucified our Lord because they hated him. They thought that they could silence him, and they thought that they had defeated him. They thought that they had won. But in their actions, Jesus was raised to his eternal throne. If they didn't do those things, then Jesus wouldn't have gone to the cross. If he didn't go to the cross, he wouldn't have resurrected. He wouldn't have accomplished victory over sin and death. If he wasn't crucified, Scripture wouldn't be fulfilled. He wouldn't have been resurrected. Sin wouldn't have been paid for. His purpose in coming would not have been accomplished. The very thing that the world thought was victory over Jesus was actually Jesus' victory. This is how God works. Now, in this passage in Genesis, we see God's sovereignty being worked out through the sin and hatred of his brothers, not in spite of it. It was their very thing that brought Joseph to where he needed to go. In fact, he later will tell his brothers, "You meant this for evil, but God did it for good." This is the God we worship. He is the God who is able to do exceedingly abundantly more than we ask or imagine. And we need to look no further than the cross. See, there's nothing in your life that God is not in control of. Hear this. There is nothing in your life that God is not in control of. There is nothing being done to you. There is nothing that you have done that God cannot use for his purpose and his glory. Romans 8:28, and we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good. For those who love God and are called according to his purpose, all things. Do you believe that? No matter what you're going through, no matter what you're experiencing, no matter what you've done, God will use that for his glory and his purpose. You never have to worry. Have I done too much? Have I done something so bad that God can't use? No. All things work together for good. We may not understand it. We may not see it. We may not think it's good. There are times in our lives where we will say, I really don't see how good can come of this. I really wish this wouldn't happen to me. But I guarantee you, the moment we enter into eternity, our eyes will be opened and we will see how God used things that we can't even imagine. People will be impacted. People will be there because of our story, because of what God has done in us. Think about the word history, right? We all have a history. The word history, this is not, I'm not doing some sort of linguistic thing here. So if this isn't what it really means, I don't care. But when I see the word history, I think of his story. It is his story. All of that's what's happened is his story. What's happening in our nation today is his story. He will use it for his good and his purpose. We may not like it. We may not like where it's going, and that's okay. But we have to understand that he uses all things. All things, even being put into pit and sold into slavery, is used for his glory and his purpose. We may not be able to make sense of things now. We may say, I don't know why. And you know what? That's okay. Because I would venture to guess that even if God told us why, none of us would appreciate it or accept it until after we go through it and we can look back and say, God was right there. God was right there. If we knew what was going to happen, if we knew how it was going to happen, none of us would learn. That's the beauty of God. He knows what we need, and he gives it to us, whether we like it or not. The beauty is we don't have to know why, because we know him and we trust him. Trust him, not your circumstances. Look to him, not around in your life at what's happening. He is in control. Rest in him, not in your circumstances. Trust him, not your situation. Dream in him, not in your own desires. And if you do, I guarantee you that in the long run, you will not be disappointed. You will be grateful, and you will know him more, and you will be able to trust him more.